It's live. Awesome. It looks like it's live on Facebook. So yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Mohammed Shidan and I will be the moderator for today's panel. This session is a part of CARE Washington's Lobbying Day, Muslim Day at the Capitol. It's co-sponsored by the Somali Health Board. The purpose of this panel and all of MDAC really is to demystify the Capitol, to make public policy understandable and accessible to Muslims in Washington state. Personally, I've always been interested in policy and advocacy work. I started off in CARE Washington as a community organizer focused on community relationship building, and then became the youth and advocacy coordinator leading our youth work. And now I'm the newly appointed policy associate. So policy is something that I've always been passionate about and really excited to be on this journey. Joining me on this panel is Jorge, Barón, the executive director at Northwest Immigrant Right Project, Manus, the director of advocacy and community engagement at Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, Brenda Rodriguez, Lopez, executive director at Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, Kendrick Washington, the director of policy advocacy group at ACLU Washington, and Mohammed Shidan, who I think will be joining hopefully in a bit. But yeah, we can start, and I would love if each of the panelists could introduce yourselves and how you came into policy work. Maybe if I could have Brenda start us off.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Brenda, she, her pronouns, and I'm sitting here in front of you as the executive director of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. But 20 years ago, I arrived to the state of Washington as an undocumented immigrant from Mexico. I came here to reunite with my farm worker family in rural Washington after years of being separated from them. And I remember walking through the desert and hiding from border patrols. So growing up, I understood that my family and I were undocumented. And I grew up in fear of what would happen if Immigration Custom Enforcement, ICE, would, come to our house and detain my family or me. As the oldest child, I was always the family advocate, the translator, the interpreter, and had to be resourceful to help my family navigate life in this country as undocumented immigrants who didn't speak English. And that's really how I started as an organizer. Because of the lack of action at a federal level to pass a pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants like myself, I became involved in local and state communities, and that's really where my journey in policy began, because policy changes will be immediately felt by my family and I. So this work is personal and therefore political, because our humanity is always contested. So when I came to WAISN, I've been able to champion just that. And the important policy and organizing work that will bring positive and transformative change to local and state communities. As WAISN, we are an organization that's in over 22 counties, working with communities impacted by immigration injustice. And we have a statewide trusted community hotline where undocumented immigrants not only report sightings of immigration or detentions, but they also call us and are connected to services and resources. So the hotline is really that ear on the ground, and how as a network of 400 organizations, we identify gaps and barriers in our community, and that becomes policy.
So that's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Brenda. If any of the other panelists want to jump in, feel free to, please.
I don't know if anybody wants to follow Brenda is the problem. I'll go ahead and go next. Jorge Barón, I'm the he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and I'm very grateful to our colleagues at CARE Washington for inviting me to be part of this space, and glad to be in community with all of you. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia. So like Brenda, an immigrant, but I'm also very conscious of the very privileged path that my family had to be able to come here to the United States. We came on visas, and that provided us with opportunities that a lot of other community members do not have. But I still remember my, I think a lot of the reasons that I do the work that I do now still have to do with that transition coming to the US as a 13-year-old, not speaking English. And I often tell folks that, I still remember, it was, a few decades ago that we came, the folks who were very kind and welcoming. And I also remember the folks who were not kind and welcoming, and who made fun of me for not speaking English, or because of what my name might be. And so I always wanted to be part of that community that would be welcoming. And that's what I think of my work, is just to welcome folks who are recently arrived, or so folks who've been here for a long time, but who are still treated as others. And so that's what's driven me to the work on at our organization, which provides, most of our work is actually not on the policy front, it's on providing direct legal services and individual assistance. But the reason that we do engage in policy advocacy is because many times we come to help clients with particular issues or questions that they have, and the answer is that the policy is bad, that we can't help them because the policy is not good. And so it's not the primary focus of our work. We try to work in partnership, and we're grateful to be in partnership with organizations like WAISN and CARE Washington in trying to help change policies both at the state and federal level. And that's why we think it's important to be working on both fronts, both on the policy as well as on the individual assistance work. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Jorge. Mohammed, if you want to hop in and introduce yourself and let us know how you kind of got into policy work, that would be great.
Thank you, Najma. Thank you, everyone. It's a very beautiful panel to be a part of, and I really feel privileged. My name is Mohammed Shidan. I'm the Deputy Director of the Somali Health Board. We're a small nonprofit organization. We're also a very close partner and friend with CARE Washington. We've actually done the Muslim Day at the Capitol event together. I think the last 4 years. It was fun when we were able to go to to Olympia, in buses, and that felt more communal. Yes, so our mission at SHB is to tackle health disparities that impact that impacts the East African immigrants and refugees, Muslims, anybody who is not, the quote unquote, American, established American. And we realized at a very young age in our establishment that could not happen if we continue doing our engagements and education, but also we need to tackle things systemically. So that is that realization, and we did not always have the power or the money to actually engage or talk about policies that affect the health and the well-being of our communities, but with partnerships like CARE and just learning every day and grinding the work helped us get a foothold, at least in understanding what policies are out there affecting adversely in our communities. And it's all about allies and partners. There's a lot of good allies that we count on when it comes to talking to our elected officials about policies. But most importantly, it's just knowing that if we don't speak on this, our community is less prepared to do this on their own. And just taking that initiative is a huge part of being a grassroots organization. I don't know if I answered the questions directly, Najma. I always go all over the place.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you for introducing yourself. We can have maybe Maya or Kendrick hop on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Maya. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement with the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. Thank you, CARE, for inviting me to be on this panel today. I'm excited for this conversation. I am a Washington native. I was born and raised in Washington, sort of all over, but mostly in the Tacoma area. And at starting in high school, connected with nonprofit organizations in the Tacoma area, and they always had like a lobby day. So I remember going to the Capitol as early as like sophomore in high school, I would say, and advocating for different pieces of legislation. And being from Tacoma, Olympia is a lot closer, so it doesn't feel as if it is something that's like in a faraway land, like it can feel like if you live in a city such as the city of Seattle. And so from there, you know, really was really interested wanting to learn how the system worked. So I took a lot of government classes, and I didn't know if I wanted to go to law school or get my PhD. I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I didn't know where. So I decided to work at a nonprofit to sort of figure out what my next step would be for grad school. And so that's when I started working at the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, where I work today. Started out as the receptionist, have done a lot of great work doing direct service work in the housing department at the Urban League, building up our those who are experiencing homelessness programs, such as, you know, direct funding for move-in cost or getting themselves out of experiencing homelessness, or at least being able to make them stable with programs such as like safe lots and etc. So I was able to see directly like the impact that specifically law, or specifically what landlords were be able to do in terms of kicking out tenants or raising up the rents or whatever the case may be. That's what made me want to get involved more with how government works, how this happens, because one thing's for sure, and I'm pretty sure we'll talk about this more later, is that everything sort of goes back to policy. If something isn't working the way that it should be, or it could be working better, it's because policy that says that they should be doing something a certain way, or it's silent on the issue. So that's when I just really started to get involved in that. And through the work of our CEO, Michelle, and I were able to really develop what it meant for the Urban League to advocate for policy for Black and vulnerable populations in Olympia. And so sort of always been involved in this work, and always was able to make that connection on how we don't like something, it always goes back to policy. So thank you. And I'll pass it to Kendrick, I think.
Thanks. Wow. Super. I mean, everybody here is super impressive, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. You know, my story, I guess, is somewhat different. I don't know the immigration history of my family, certainly because I am a direct descendant of slaves. My great-great-grandmother sharecropped in Mississippi, and both my grandparents actually are from Mississippi, and both fled and met in the North under similar circumstances because a member of their family was lynched, and they were forced to leave Mississippi for their safety. And so they fled to St. Louis, which I know most people won't think is much better, but comparatively, it was a better life for them. And so, you know, the part of me that wants to fight, the advocate, the human that I am, really stems from you know, being a Southerner at my core, so to speak, in the ways that my family has, you know, maintained a lot of their Southern values and traditions, including the fights for justice to this day. You know, I came into this work a little bit later. I went to law school. Policy was not on my radar. I wanted to go to court and do all the things and be the next Johnny Cochran. And you know, did that for a while, went to court and was a public defender and did direct representation of clients. And to this day, really still love anything that puts me in contact with the people that are being impacted. But after actually facing police abuse of my own in 2016, I realized that direct representation wasn't going to bring about the change that our communities needed. You know, even to that point, I think there was still a little part of me that was said I had done all the things, right? I went to school and I got the degrees, and I think the day I got beat up, I was wearing khakis and a polo, you know, so I was dressed the way I was supposed to be dressed, and I was paying my taxes. And that really sort of changed that path for me. And I was already working with young people. And so I took an opportunity to work in Chicago public schools and realized what a mess that was, and then took an opportunity to work as a civil rights attorney for the Department of Education before finally moving out here about 3 years ago to work with the ACLU first as Youth Policy Council, and now as the Director of Policy, the Policy and Advocacy Group. And really have found such a rich, diverse and fascinating community, you know, that sort of tells a different tale than what you hear of Seattle in the mainstream. All my friends are like, oh, you're gonna love Seattle. It's so liberal over there. It's gonna be great. And they forgot the word neo in front of liberal, I think. And so here I am, immersed in the policy world, and what I preach constantly and what I'm always pushing for, you know, is reminding the policy wonks that exist in all these spaces is that this has to be community driven. And I know that's not always the ACLU's reputation, but this has to be community driven. Like, here's this great policy, but you know what this policy looks like me in this Zoom meeting? Real pretty on top with my sweater and polo, but trash sweats and gym socks on the bottom, right? And we don't need policy that looks pretty on the surface, but is trash underneath. And so, you know, I've really been sort of working towards that, and really the desire for more people in community to have a voice, to understand how they can testify, to understand how they could reach out to their legislators, to understand how they can push policy in the ways that benefit them, and remind, you know, the folks in Olympia and wherever the heck else, you know, they live when they're not in Olympia, that you're not doing this to get reelected. You know, you can save us this middling moderate nonsense because you're in a vulnerable seat this session, right? Like, it's time, it's time to do what the people need. Like, revolution isn't a handshake behind a closed door. And so that's sort of where I sit right now. I'm sure my bosses love that I said that, but you know, it is what it is.
Awesome. There's a bunch of really cool people on this panel. It's so exciting to hear from you all and to hear about how you, you know, got into policy work and the work that you're doing and what's inspired by. So really inspiring. Maya, since you talked about your work into policy and just like the importance of Black folks and folks of color and really marginalized communities, knowing the importance of like policy and the effects that policy have, I am curious to know if there are any bills or things going on in this session that you really want folks to know about.
Yes. Yes, so there are policies that are really beneficial that are moving in Olympia. And then I will note that there are things that are stalled that could have moved forward, but linking to Kendrick's point, there's this issue of not sort of doing what's right, but sort of just doing the safest route. So I'll highlight stuff that is still in play and still that is very meaningful, that could be passed into law this year, that is doing a lot of really great work. And then some things that are not moving any further that would do a lot of really great work, but is going to be something that we're going to need everybody at the table to be able to pass next year. So some that is still happening this year that I'll highlight is like solitary confinement restrictions. So currently right now, if you are currently incarcerated, you can be in solitary confinement for years. Some people have been in incarceration for a year, 2 years, 20 years, even, you know, 6 months can be very detrimental to somebody's mental health. And so let me get the bill number. House Bill 1756 is something that is moving along very well. And it would limit, it's not a perfect bill. There's no such thing as a perfect bill, but it would limit the amount of days to 15. So 15 at a given time, 45 days in a whole entire year. So somebody would not be able to be in solitary confinement or lockdown or the SHU or whatever the current term is for somebody who's in a cell for hours on end without access to daylight or community or what have you to 15 days, as well as they wouldn't be able to be in that cell no longer than 17 hours within a day. So right now it can be upwards to 23 and a half hours and you're only out for 30 minutes to be able to like take a shower or whatever the case may be. So that one's a really impactful bill, just because it sort of starts chipping away the idea of when somebody's incarcerated, that means that they can be treated any sort of way. And they deserve access to behavioral health services, community, access to their family back home. So it can really start that conversation moving forward. And then another one that's moving really well is just access to more behavioral health resources. I think community and lawmakers are understanding that we're not only in a public health crisis because of COVID-19, but we're in a behavioral health crisis because of COVID-19. And being really acknowledging that everybody should have access to behavioral health, that we don't expand the opportunity for people to become behavioral health specialists, so expanding that, as well as acknowledging that youth deserve access to mental health and days off from school because they're having a mental health break. So there's a group of bills that are really addressing issues of behavioral health. One bill that I will highlight that isn't moving any further and people should really know about that is Housing Justice Act, which is House Bill 2017. And that one was to be able to not have criminal history used in terms of determining if somebody would be a great tenant or not. But it was considered a controversial bill, so it sort of didn't make it through the cutoffs. And so, you know, to me, it makes sense that everybody deserves housing. Everybody deserves a chance to have access to housing. So definitely we'll need people to support and really tune in on that one in the next year. So that's sort of the bills that we're currently focusing on, or some things that people should really keep in mind this legislative session.
Thank you so much, Maya. Jorge, I'd love it if you could mention if there are any bills or things going on in session that you really want folks to know about.
Sure. Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our work is done in kind of coalition, and I know Brenda's going to speak to some of the work that we've been part of as part of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. So I won't focus on that, even though we're very supportive of those efforts. But I'll talk about two items on the budget that we've been focused on, because I think one of the things is that I think as folks know, there's kind of the policy bills. But I think there's also like policy that gets made through like the budget, which is a big component, and one that I think people sometimes don't pay as much attention to, but has a pretty important impact on services and on how you know, the impact on the community. So one of the things that we've been working with, and we appreciate that this has been in collaboration with Care Washington as well as others, has been addressing kind of a new need that has emerged over the past few months as a result of Afghan community members who were evacuated over the last several months after, of course, the takeover by the Taliban in Afghanistan and the evacuation of people to the US. And I think most of the time when people are talking in the community, people talk about Afghan refugees. And I think we use the term refugee in the context of kind of like the broader context of people escaping persecution. But one thing that I think people don't know is that a lot of the people who have been evacuated from Afghanistan were brought to the United States and of course got safety, which is important as an immediate thing, but they were brought in not through the traditional refugee program, which grants them kind of a more permanent status in the United States in terms of their immigration status, but were actually brought in through or allowed to come in through something called humanitarian parole, which is kind of a quicker way, which was good in the situation because it meant that people could come in more quickly, but it also meant that their status is not fully resolved. So they're not in immigration law technically refugees yet. And so there's been a lot of advocacy at the federal level to address that situation and to provide individuals who were paroled into the United States a kind of quicker path to a green card, to lawful permanent residence, to citizenship. But unfortunately, at least in the congressional level in Washington, D.C., those efforts have not been successful so far. I think we should continue pushing on that front, but so far that hasn't happened. And so now we're confronting the fact that these new community members are new neighbors from Afghanistan who have arrived, and we're talking about, depending on the number, from at least 2,000, but probably end up being closer to 3,000 ultimately, will need assistance to be able to go through now a more complicated process, either through asylum or some other types of humanitarian protections in order to be able to stay here. And that might be surprising to people that after that evacuation and getting people out of danger, that now they're going to be potentially confronting that situation where they could be sent back or at least lose their status. And so we're trying to work very hard not to let that happen. And so there's two kind of different budget items that we've asked the legislature for. So one is specifically in terms of legal services to be able to support and expand the capacity to ensure that those individuals are going to be able to get assistance in navigating that process. And then that ask is for a total of 2.2 million in the 2-year budget. And then there's a larger ask of $30 million that is also being supported by a broad coalition, including our refugee resettlement agencies. And that is to address the rest of the needs. This is, in terms of housing, case management, just support, because the system has been pretty overwhelmed by the numbers and how quickly they've had to deploy these resources. And so, and I think for us, this is, part of, when we talk about being a welcoming community and a welcoming state, part of that needs to be to invest the resources to make sure that our new neighbors are able to get the support to during this transition period. And so we hope that all of you will help us, convey that message to the legislature about the importance of making these investments, which, in the long run, when we, invest in community, we see tremendous return in the future. And so we see it as an important priority, and we hope all of you will help us drive that message to legislators about the importance of making, investments right now for these new Afghan neighbors that are joining our community throughout the state.
Awesome, thank you, Jorge. Yeah, like you mentioned, Care Washington is pushing for that, and we're going to be following up with people on like action alerts and just like ways that they can support. Since it isn't a bill, it's like a budget. We really just need to like talk about it more and pressure our legislators and the folks in office to know that this is something that's really important and it's something that they need to take seriously. So thank you for mentioning that, Jorge. Yeah, if we could maybe have Brenda, if you could talk about some of WAISN's priorities, things going on in session, things you want people to know about.
Yeah, so as WAISN, we've had 2 campaigns over the last 2 years that we have been advocating for at the legislature. And because of the short session, we went with a strategy to only introduce one bill that we are looking for to reintroduce in the next session that will expand unemployment benefits to undocumented workers. That bill is not moving forward this session, and that's SB 5438 that was sponsored by Senator Saldana. And for the second campaign, the Health Equity for Immigrants, we are seeking a budget ask of between 80 to 100 million to fund the infrastructure needed to develop a Medicaid-like healthcare program for undocumented immigrants and other immigrants who are barred from accessing healthcare in a holistic way beyond emergency and pregnancy care. So we are asking for organization support to sign on to a letter that will be sent to the House Appropriations and the Senate Ways and Means Committee today. So we'll be sending that to you all so that you can help us amplify so that undocumented communities and other immigrants have access to a Medicaid-like program to care for their health beyond emergency and pregnancy care. And I also, as WAISN, we are very much supportive and uplifting the budget asks that Jorge mentioned, especially around the $30 million that will go towards strengthening the resettlement infrastructure to serve refugees in our state. So that's also going to be a sign-on letter that will be shared around, and we are encouraging all of our partners to sign on to both so that we can have the money in our communities so that our communities don't just have what they need to survive, but they have what they need to thrive and start a life where they have the resources and services that they need.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenda. You can kick it off to Kendrick. Maybe if you could talk about ACLU Washington's priorities and things we want to know about stuff going on in session.
Sure. You know, we have a big policy team, and so we're working sort of across a lot of areas. I know we're doing work with Brenda on the stuff that she just talked about, and certainly on the solitary confinement bill that Maya spoke about earlier. So I'm going to maybe stay a little bit in my own lane, and because my colleagues are much better at describing the things that they're doing. But we're doing a lot of policing work this session. As you know, there's been a lot of efforts to roll back some of the great policing bills that we got passed last session. And an area that I'm working in that isn't necessarily policing, but I think is adjacent, is there's a bill called SB 5122, and it's concerning the jurisdiction of juvenile court. In Washington state, we can arrest children as young as 8 years old and throw them in jail. Now, I don't know if folks have had an 8-year-old in their presence, but an 8-year-old is certainly not someone who should be subjected to the violence that is, jail or prison, or is really capable of understanding the long-term consequences of the behaviors that they commit. And so what we're looking to do is raise that age from 8 to 13. So anyone 8 to 12 would not be able to be arrested by the police. And so this really serves two purposes, right? Because I've listened to a lot of politicians talk about these rollbacks, and they're like, we want to make communities safe, but we also don't want to impede police investigations, and we want to create cooperation between communities, yada, yada, yada. But let me tell you something, on the off chance that any of them are here listening. What you don't do is create cooperation in communities by arresting their children. You don't walk into the most over-policed, marginalized, and oppressed communities and beat down their kids and then think there's going to be any level of cooperation. And for me, it always starts with the kids, right? Like, you want to build trust, treat my children right. You want to get something done, make productive citizens, educate my children right. And so this is one of the areas that I've really been focusing on, and stopping this extremely disproportionate arrests of brown and Black and other youth of color. in Washington State has to be at the forefront of their minds if they're going to build any sort of community relationships. You can't beat down the kids and then think their parents are going to want to come and shake your hands later. Like, that's just not how it works. And as we know, communities of color, we village raise our children. And so there are other ways to deal with children that have been led astray, or who simply just do what kids do and make dumb, rash decisions without thinking. I mean, I was fortunate. If I had gotten arrested for any of the probably about 36 dumb things I did as a kid, I wouldn't be sitting here in conversation with y'all. I would be a 3-time felon that they had buried underneath the jail somewhere. But I did what the science said would happen if you left me the heck alone. I matured. I grew up. I got a job. Mostly because I didn't have police interfering in my life and having people try to shove me into the criminal legal system. We don't call it the justice system, the criminal legal system. So 5122 is one of those bills that's on the verge of stalling out. It's got to get out. It's got to get on the floor for a vote by the 15th. So we're currently in the process of reaching out to allies, asking them to contact leadership directly, like providing emails. And so if anyone on here wants that information, I'm happy to have it. But giving Senate and House leadership a kick in the pants to say, hey, this bill has got to get to the floor and get voted on. And we have to have the opportunity to have these conversations on behalf of our children.
Yeah, thank you, Kendrick. Senate Bill 5122 is also on our legislative agenda today for Muslim Days of Capital. So we've sent out emails to legislators that we're meeting with on that bill, as well as one of the policing bills, the bad policing bills, HB 2037, letting them know about our opposition to that, as well as our partner organizations and their stances on that. So thank you all for sharing. I think the last one is Mohammed. If you can share some of Somali Health Board's priorities this session and things you really want community members to know.
Thank you, Najma, and thank you all. This is really one of the benefits for me attending this panel with this fine colleagues is all the things that I can learn, all the things that I could be interested in.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. I think your audio cut off a little bit.
How about now? Is this better?
You're good. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just appreciating my colleagues here. So some of the stuff that we Somali Health Board we've been really following any health related policies, and we've been involved in the conversation with I don't know if you guys are aware of, but state of Washington wants to move to universal healthcare system, where a state-sponsored healthcare that covers everybody and ensures quality coverage as well as affordability. So that is something that might happen in the next coming years, and we've been involved in that conversation, adding our voice on the voices like people like our communities, marginalized communities to the table, that this is how this affects us, especially things that are not like really covered through insurance right now, like mental health. We know how that impacts people. And you can almost connect everything, every problem that we have in our communities to everything that the system created. For example, if incarcerating 15-year-olds creates stigma within the community, it basically puts them in the corner for mental health related problems and behavioral health and addiction and things like that. But when that becomes full blown, and people are homeless, we tend to say, oh, this is a healthcare concern and we want to fix this. Imagine if we addressed, incarcerating our youth and disproportionately targeting, Black and people of color youth for private, prisons. So all of these things are connected. But one of the really cool things that I learned through this policy work is when we always seem to be like 10 years behind on change. For example, when the state of Washington decided to move forward with the light rail construction, for example, there were people there that knew that within 10 years, the prices of the buildings in that area will skyrocket. People will be displaced So they started doing something about it for their own, private, gains. But our communities, our mosques and churches and community centers there did not get the memo. So we just stayed on. And then what happens within 5 years, everybody gets displaced, businesses are lost. So one of the, bills that we're closely following right now is on that. It's House Bill 1494 by Representative Harris Talley that, helps reinvest within communities. And also there's also another Senate bill, which 5706, which also I think has a bill closely related to it in the House 1827, which is the new community reinvestment fund. So what SHV right now is trying to do is, in order for us not to be moved away from our schools and our hospitals, our pharmacies, our community centers and mosques, we are trying to encourage the communities and other organizations like us to actually pull together to buy property. Once you start owning property as a community, it will be so hard for people to be displaced. The problems that we see, especially within the last 2 years in the pandemic, all of these community members moved or pushed priced out to places that do not have resources set up, like Federal Way and Auburn. We need to bring the testing events or vaccine events to all the way to Federal Way because there's not a lot of resources there. And this thing seems to happen like repeatedly every 10 years. If we want to do something about that, I think we strategically place ourselves in different coalitions to address different policies, but we actually need to figure out how to fund more policy work in every nonprofit organization, because there's not a lot of fundings out there right now. And I remember the last 2 years, me and our executive director have been putting enough extra hours just to be on coalition meetings that are not funded. That is extra to our work because there's no funding for policy. But we know if we don't do that right now, and if we don't encourage our friends to do that, we'll always be 10 years late to things that impact our communities. I don't know if that answered the question, but as you can see, I'm very passionate about this work, and I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mohammed. I think that kind of ties into the next question that I had, which is it sounds like you all obviously have a ton of experience in the public policy front. I'd love to know what has helped you get to where you are in the forefront of the work, of your work, and what advice you have for others who want to set off in a similar direction. So I think I'll start off with Jorge this time.
Well, I think one of the things that I think is really important, and a couple of, I think many of you have mentioned, my co-panelists have mentioned this before, is the importance of the work being community driven if it's going to be impactful. And I think for us at NERP, we, as I mentioned, a lot of times, the reason that we became involved in policy work is simply because we see, as people come to us and say, this is the issue I'm having, this is our clients are coming to us and saying, this is the problem that I'm having, and we try to work with them to figure out, okay, what solution would do that. And so I think, just to give an example of something that we talked about earlier, that Brenda talked about the unemployment insurance bill, that is an issue that we have been confronted a lot, and we don't, to be clear, we actually don't handle unemployment issues as a work, but of course, because we do immigration legal services work, a lot of our clients would come to us with a question am I eligible for this? And it's an issue that over the years we kind of continue hearing. I remember having this conversation when I was testifying about this bill. I mentioned this, I got a call a couple of years ago. This was pre-pandemic. This community member had been working, at this one, with this one business, had been employed there for over 20 years, and had recently been laid off for circumstances that were out of his control. And he was trying to figure out if he was eligible for unemployment benefits, right? And this person had been working at the same employer for that long. The employer had been paying into the unemployment insurance trust fund to be able to, that supports this whole system, right? And yet when the time came, that this community member would need that assistance, they couldn't access it because of their immigration status. And so that's like, when we hear, like, we weren't setting out to like say like we're gonna decide that this is like the right policy. It's because like community was coming to us saying like, this is an issue, this is a barrier, right? Our immigration status is a barrier, like we need a solution to this. And I think in collaborate, that's I think like the what WAISN and other of our colleagues have been hearing, and how we decide to focus on a particular issue is because of like how it's coming up to the community. So I think that's really important. I think it's really critical in terms of making policy work, and something that I think it's really important as folks are interested in pursuing that route.
Awesome. Thank you, Jorge. Can have Maya maybe jump on?
Yeah, so I think sort of the advice that I would give for people who are really interested into this work is, one, know that your lived experience is experience. So if you or your community is running into a constant, continual barrier or access to a certain institution or agency, or you have a pothole outside of your apartment complex or house or whatever the case may be, if there's like an issue that's a problem, there is usually a lawmaker you can talk to, usually your own lawmaker that you can talk to, since you are a constituent or a resident within that area, to be able to make systemic change. And your lived experience is enough to be able to get the ball rolling. The only other additional advice that I would give is that if you want to have like a continual relationship with the legislature, specifically like the state legislature, it is like a chess game. And once you figure out the rules of the chess game, you can pretty much play it with any sort of bill that you have. So the only advice I would give, if you want to make it like a continual relationship, is connecting with somebody who already understands the game and be able to teach you sort of the strategic plays within the legislature, and then applying that with your lived experience. And the one thing that I will add is there isn't enough of us, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, especially immigrants in this. So if there is somebody in your community who is a lobbyist or a legislative aide or even a lawmaker, they're willing to share the gems or the game in it of itself, because there isn't enough of us and we want more people to be involved. So so that's sort of the advice that I would give, is that it is a chess game. There is moves that you would have to make, hearing things like it takes 3 years for a bill to become a law, like, is really frustrating to hear, but is something that we constantly hear all the time. And so being able to understand that is really helpful. So that's sort of the advice that I would give.
Thank you, Maya. And I guess I'd pass it off to Brenda. If you could tell us, what helped you get to where you are in the forefront of your work, and what advice you would have for others who want to set off in a similar direction.
Thank you, Jorge and Maya, for sharing that. That's beautiful what you have shared. For me, who has helped me get to the forefront of my work has been trans women of color who have been mentors and founders of immigrant movements, especially in Washington State. My commitment to an intersectional immigrant justice agenda that focuses on racial, ethnic, gender dynamics has really strengthened my ability to see migrants in their complexity. And I have always been an organizer, and that complements really well with WAISN's superpowers. So there are no shortcuts to building relationships and community. And that really has to be at the core of everything that we do. And it really will drive the work forward. As WAISN and as everybody here has shared, and this is why we are partners and we are co-inspirers in this movement together, is because our work is not just community informed, it is community centered, community run, and community led. All of us here are community that is impacted by the policy that we are driving. So my advice is to remember who you are and deliberate at all times. Know where you come from and the shoulders of the giants that you stand on. Always centering your embodied experiences. We don't need a law degree, right, to do policy. Our embodied experiences informs our intuition and produce the knowledge that we need to fiercely advocate for all of us here. So that's what I would say.
Wow, thank you, Brenda. I feel like I'm learning so much from each and every one of you. Like, these questions I'm asking you is not only just for the audience, but for myself. So it's really great to hear you all. And then I'd love to have Kendrick, if you could also share some words of wisdom.
I'm not a big believer in sitting on panels and speaking just to speak or regurgitate what's already been said. Everyone has basically covered all the high level points. If I were just going to give a simple piece of advice to people who want to wade into policy work, believe Black women, believe women of color. When women of color tell you there's an issue, when they tell you there's a problem, I promise you, it is almost always the truth. It is the thing. Like, believe them, hear them, see them, and then get to work on it. Because I have yet to be led astray by listening to the women of color that are in my orbit.
Awesome, thank you. And then I think either Jorge or Mohammed, feel free to jump in.
I can go. Hey, I amen to all of that. I really, this is beautiful love for me. Just one thing I want to say, even seeing Najma, facilitate this beautiful and powerful panel it's a beautiful thing for me, because I know that was one of my fiercest, that is a word, volunteers back in my starting days at Somali Health Board. She helped do so much work within the youth, and seeing her like full circle doing this, it's really a beautiful thing for me. I just wanted to add, everything that was being said when it resonated, but also, like, I know the work itself is overwhelmingly a lot. This oppression have been built on 300 to 400 years, so it will not take 2 years to dismantle it. So just be resilient. Few success stories I want to share with the team is, once you recognize the challenges for your communities and people like you in an area, I think so much work could be done locally. For example, CTAC is an area where there's a lot of immigrant and refugee communities. Majority of the employees at CTAC Airport are immigrants and people of color. Yet that is a city council that have been run by council members who are, openly, very racist. And within just creating that awareness, since the displacements a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, now we've actually replaced 6 of those council members just by doing local community work. So, the little things that we do, the little conversations that we have with the youth and civic engagements, teaching people the power of their vote and they can change things like that, that goes a long way. Everything that I wanted to actually say has been said, so I'm just going to give the time back to my colleagues. Jorge.
Well, and I had already gone, but I did want to add one piece, and it's just following on Brenda's comment and Kendrick's comment on the chat about not needing a law degree. I would agree with that. And I would even say that I think in some ways, I'm very conscious that I think sometimes lawyers, and I say I'm a lawyer, disclosing that, but as a lawyer, I'm very conscious that oftentimes lawyers like actually make it more difficult in terms of the policy work. And that's because we are trained to think within like a certain box, a certain legal structure, and we can be a actually delay or create obstacles that should not be there because we can't think outside the box sometimes. And so I think that's something that I would say to people who are thinking about this and thinking like, oh, I need to do like law school in order to do this. I think it's not only necessary, but I think if you do choose to go that route, you also have to be conscious of the fact that like you don't let that become like an obstacle to doing the policy work, because actually sometimes it can be counterproductive. And I think those of us that do have that legal training have to think about how we sometimes can be playing into the system in a way that hinders the goals that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, thank you for adding those additional points, Jorge. I think, I kind of relate to that. I'm not a lawyer or in law school, but I am in a graduate program, health management and policy. And I really went into that program. I'm a first year now, so I'm kind of starting out, but because I felt like, I need more education, and it's always a good thing to learn more things, but, I work with such really cool youth who are advocates, who are in high school and college, and they're doing the work and they're making things happen. So really not making sure that you're understanding that your voice is important, regardless of, the level of expertise or education you have, and simply your experience, like Maya and I think Brenda mentioned, your living experience is more than enough, qualifies you for more than enough to do policy work and to make change happen. So yeah, thank you all for sharing those pieces of wisdom. I'm learning a lot. I'm sure our participants are also learning. I want to ask you guys this last question before we do closing remarks, since we are at the hour mark now. If you all can quickly maybe tell me or tell the audience what's one resource or action item that you think is really important for people wanting to dive deeper into the policy world. Like, what do you think the first step would be? And maybe I could have, Kendrick, you went on mute, so go ahead.
Sure, sorry, I have a conflicting meeting, so I want to make sure I say a few things. I think one of the easiest things you can do is go to the organizations and the coalitions and find out how you can get on their list, right? There are oftentimes we send out things like action alerts that allow people to really give voice to an issue immediately and directly to the politicians that are going to be moving on these issues. And so in terms of simplicity, really just going directly to the organizations that are doing the work that you care about and figuring out how you can fit in, even if it is just signing up. A lot of them are seeking volunteers, looking for people to testify down in Olympia who've been impacted, things like that. Just right to the source.
Awesome. Thank you, Kendrick. Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll go jump in just off of what Kendrick was saying. Another thing that I would add is, we're at a really great digital age that you can be sort of notified of whatever is best for you. So if it's Twitter, a majority of our organizations have Twitters that we will tweet out action alerts or updates, as well as a lot of lawmakers now have their own Twitter, so you can follow them and see what they're doing and sort of get like a live feed of what's happening in Olympia. A lot of our organizations have newsletters, so if you want to read a little bit more, you can subscribe to our newsletters. TVW usually has some sort of updates, so if you're more visual. So I would say go to how you already sort of obtain your news, whatever that looks like, and then just adapt it a little bit more to the policy work and policies that are happening. WALEDGE, the hashtag WALEDGE on Twitter usually is used for different things that are happening in Olympia.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. Can we have maybe one more person share resources or anything that you think that would be helpful for people diving into this work?
If I might just add,
Yeah.
this is for organizations. I think just to decolonize the processes. For example, if you everything that we do things has been established and it's not very accessible to people like us. So if you have to culturally break it down and make it accessible to everybody, especially youth, there's so much power in the youth. So the youth can have access to your meetings and your programs, and so that they can add their efforts to it. I think just decolonizing the systems, the process that we use, so that it's culture appropriate, but it's also like less scary for people to step in and submit their voice. I think that is the only thing that I would add. Thank you, Najma.
Thank you, Mohammed. That's a really, really good point. Great. And maybe if everyone can share like ways you can be contacted or reached, whether that's like via email or ways that participants or folks wanting to support your work, how they can do so. And you could either type that in the chat or say it on camera, up to you. Okay, cool. Kendrick typed it on the chat. Yeah, great. Yeah, feel free to type it in the chat if you all want to share your contact information. It is 12:04. It's about 10 minutes early, but I think we could kind of start concluding the program. Thank you to all of the panelists for joining me today. It honestly has been such an honor being in space with you all, learning from you all, and receiving your wisdom. So thank you, and thank you to Katie for handling our tech, Brianna for being on the Q&A chat, and then all of the attendees for joining. And if you did not make it, it will be recorded, and we will post it later so you can watch it, snippets or the full thing. So yeah, thank you all, and yeah, we can end this session today. Thank you all so much. Bye.